Jason Moran is with us this morning. Jason tells us that he has been working at the agency for, what is it, 27 years now? 27 years. He grew up in Rosemount, Minnesota, homegrown guy, and he says he is still in the process of growing up. I love that. It's an honest thing to admit in one's bio. Jason graduated from the South Dakota School of Mines and Technology, studying geology and hydrogeology. It was his dream job to work for the MPCA as a high school student, and he made it happen. He started with the MPCA in 1998 as a haz waste and US EPA PCB inspector, and then as a multimedia inspector, and then on to the MPCA Emergency Response Program, of which he is going to tell us about today. So he's going to tell us about how the program works and is integrated with local units of government and the responsible parties to ensure an effective and efficient response. Excuse me, an effective and efficient response to ensure protection of human health and the environment. Jason, it is great to have you with us. Why don't you take it away whenever you're ready?
All right. Thanks, Mark. I've sat in on a lot of these talks that your group has given, and man, I just love all the smart people you bring in, the professors and everything else. So I feel privileged to be here. Maybe a little underling from what some of the other folks do, but we'll make the best of it. So I'll share my presentation here. Okay, is that working?
Looks good.
All right. So like I said, I'm Jason Moran with the MPCA's Emergency Response Program. And what I'm going to talk about is kind of a little overview of our program so people kind of understand that. And then there's this thing that the state of Minnesota has called the Minnesota Emergency Operations Plan. Won't go too deep into that, but that kind of defines how each of the state agencies fit and their roles within emergency response within the agencies, all the different agencies. And then I'm going to talk about some real world responses that we had, some of the science behind them, the technology, and just humanity and just dealing with people in crisis and trauma as well. You probably don't get a lot of that from us. So I'm going to add some of that stuff that maybe you don't think about the agency or emergency response does. And I'll stop periodically if some people have questions. Take them at the end if anybody has some. So really high level, without getting deep into it, we have all these different statutory authorities and delegations given to us by the commissioner. But the big one we run across is Minnesota Statute 115061, which basically says if people have releases that could impact the waters of the state, they need to report that immediately. We take that as being immediately, not 24 hours, not 12 hours. We do say if it is a big emergency, call 911 first if you need that. Call the cleanup contractors if you need that. And then if you call the agency through the Minnesota duty officer right away, we consider that compliant. If somebody reports a spill outside of that, we might start asking, what were you doing in this time frame to help determine compliance? And then we would educate them on what they need to do better in the future, if anything. And people need to recover their release as rapidly, as thoroughly as possible. It's our program policy that if you have a fresh current spill, recovery is expected to be 100%, full recovery. Real world comes into that, so that's not always possible, but that is the expectation. Keep doing it. Okay, and then we have petroleum tank release cleanup, oil substance cleanup for spill preparedness and prevention requirements that some of the big players need to comply with. So we can get into that. We talk about who's in control of a spill is required for cleaning it up. We call that the responsible party. We're not saying that the responsible party is responsible for causing the spill, but they are responsible for reporting it and cleaning it up And if somebody owns a facility, they're probably a responsible party. If somebody owns a tanker truck and they're transporting fuel, they're probably the responsible party. And sometimes you can have two responsible parties who are responsible for reporting and cleaning up a spill. Say a gas station and then the tanker truck company delivering gas. If the tanker truck has a spill, they're both responsible parties. Or if you own a tank or operate a tank. So there's some definitions around that. And it's really nice to work with the responsible party on spill cleanup because they know what the spilled material is. Granted, we know what a lot of spilled materials are too, but they work with it. And they have the financial resources to pay for the cleanup. So we direct the responsible party, if they're known, to do the cleanup. For the MPCA Emergency Response Program, we have 7 responders. 3 of us are in the St. Paul office. And then we have 1 responder in each office in Duluth, Rochester, Brainerd, and Mankato. We have a hydrologist and, of course, a supervisor and manager. That's kind of the core of our program. And this is where everybody's kind of spread out, kind of our areas, if you will, but they're arbitrary. If one of our responders has a spill and needs help, especially if it's a big one, we all travel, or if somebody's on vacation, we all travel. So we share the responsibility, make sure that all the spills and emergencies get addressed without any type of delay. We work out the logistics behind the scenes, but it's easy. The way that most of this stuff works is we, in the emergency response program, we always have somebody on call 24/7. We can be reached through the Minnesota duty officer if a responsible party or a spiller has questions or wants to talk to us real time. If a city or a county is having an emergency, they can reach us real time through the duty officer. They'll call and wake us up and we'll talk to them. If they need help or resources, we'll come out and help them. We have worked with all the MPCA programs as well to help understand what they think an emergency is or what their level and capabilities of responding are, and where their program resources may not be enough to handle a situation, we can help them. Or if they call us up and ask for help, we'll provide resources and work with them. So there must be some timer on here. We get about 3,500 spill reports a year throughout the state. Most of those, admittedly, are relatively small. And then we will process them, which means we look at each one. And if it's not an emergency or something that would fit within the emergency response program, we will send it off to the MPCA program that has jurisdiction on it. So let's say it's like a wastewater spill coming out of some manhole or something. We'll send that off to the wastewater program, and they have the resources and expertise to handle that, and it's something they wouldn't need help on. So we'll send those off as well. Our capabilities, we can order cleanups, tell the responsible parties, we're ordering you, we're directing you to do this. And they have to do it. If they don't, we can hire cleanup contractors for emergency response 24 hours a day, 7 days a week kind of thing. We have contracts with them for statewide coverage, so we know who to hire. And if a spill exceeds what a contractor can handle, or if we need more, we can go off and just hire any contractor that we need to. So we have some special purchasing authorities where we can expedite responses so the state bureaucracy doesn't get in the way of protecting human health and the environment. We can look at compliance and determine if enforcement is needed on a responsible party. And we also work with companies on planning for spills and doing, it's weird. All right. So we'll work with companies and plan and do tabletop exercises, pretend scenarios to see if they're in compliance and to see how they would respond and test their spill plans to make sure everything they have in there is adequate and the right people are listed and the phone numbers work. And then we also tap all the experts we have at the agency, stuff, whether it's computer, GIS, wastewater, contaminant fate in water, the air. We have so many scientists and experts at the agency. We will tap them and bring them into a response if it's needed and harness the vast knowledge and resources of the agency as a whole. And that's been fabulous for us. Role in the MEOP, which is the Minnesota Emergency Operations Plan. I won't go really deep into this, but there's roles we have where we're primary, where we help coordinate and we support. This first photo is just a big oil spill in the winter. No matter what the conditions are, we got to go out there and deal with some of that stuff. We will help municipal wastewater systems determine what type of damage or impact they've had to their infrastructure. So we'll support them on that and work with our wastewater programs. We are the lead role for the state if there's hazardous materials involved in an incident. We'll run the incident, we'll recommend protective and response actions. And if it is an agricultural chemical where we're not the lead agency, that would be the Minnesota Department of Health. We'll support them. And then we also have roles in nuclear, chemical, biological, and weapons of mass destruction support as well. So we coordinate with all the different state agencies that work on that and do drills and tabletops with them and respond in real life to support each other. Debris management, we are the primary state agency to manage large debris incidents from tornadoes, big floods. And of course, the incidents are all local. So we come in and we support the locals on that. We don't take over the incidents. Terrorism, weapons of mass destruction, obviously that would be a crime scene. So we'd work with the authorities on what to do with the debris and when, so we don't disturb evidence collection. A lot of coordination. Public works and utilities restoration. Let's say wastewater treatment plants go down. We'll help bring those back up online. If we need to supply people with safe drinkable water because something happened, we can do that and work with some of our other agency partners to do that in the short term and the long term. And sometimes we'll even drill new drinking water wells if needed as a part of an emergency and do some sampling. If there's an environmental hazard, we're the lead role in it. If it's a non-ag chem or non-radiological incident, we're the lead on that under the Minnesota Emergency Operations Plan. So enough on that. One of the big things that we operate under is what's called the incident command. So you'll kind of see this little box chart here. On top, we have this thing called an incident commander, or it could be reflected as incident commanders under unified command. But basically what this is just an understandable way that people in the emergency response community would come to a scene. You know where you're going to fit in, you know what your role is, or when you get there, you get assigned a role. That's where you fit in. And it keeps things organized. Everybody has a role, everybody knows their place, how they contribute to the incident. So we're not stepping on each other or trying to duplicate efforts. Helps with utilization of resources, efficient response. Also span of control. Each person, typically, you can only oversee 5 to 8 people. So you delegate down different tasks to different people so that you don't get overwhelmed and you can keep doing what you need to. And people at the bottom on this chart report back up, and the high level information gets up to the people that need to know and are making decisions. Some other people are just doing different tasks, keeping track of the money, keeping track of staffing. Depending on how big the incident is, this could get quite large, or it could just be 3 or 4 boxes if it's a small incident. It's scalable and it can go up and down really quick. Okay, so for the MPCA, when we come on, we have to determine what the incident or the emergency response or objectives are. Now, we are an environmental agency, so that's kind of our main role. But when we get on a scene, we're working with fire departments, police departments, county law enforcement, health, the companies, tons of federal agencies sometimes. And we all understand, all the different players, that the first priority is always protecting human health. That's number one. We don't want people getting sick. We don't want people dying. We want to do that. Then we protect property, like people's homes, the businesses, the critical infrastructure. All that stuff comes first. And then the environment comes into play as a lower priority below protecting life and property. And sometimes the decisions we make as a group in incident command might make the environment worse for a short period of time. And that's okay. We have ways to deal with that and get it cleaned up and protect it afterwards. But you don't want to be protecting the environment and then it costs people to die or get sick. So we follow these, and there's really not a lot of argument on site. We all understand these and the implications of decisions that we made, and we deal with it. Some of the things that we really care about is protecting water intakes. So maybe it's municipal drinking water intakes like the city of Minneapolis, St. Paul, industrial water intakes for companies. A lot of resorts have their own water intakes off of lakes or off of streams or rivers. So we want to protect those if there's an incident. We'll call people, talk with them, set up containment, recovery, try to minimize impacts to that. So that's a big one. Sensitive species. We work a lot with the Upper Mississippi River Basin Association, and they developed this neat product called the Inland Sensitivity Atlas, which is GIS based. So you can pull it up and see what type of endangered species are in the area where there might be a spill, what type of sensitive or cultural or historic points of interest are there that might need protecting, as well as certain economic interests. So that goes into the planning of where do we start cleaning up, what areas do we protect, what areas are we trying to keep the spill from getting to, stuff like that. We work a lot with cities and counties and all the other agencies, and it'd be really hard to pull off a successful response without doing that. A lot of times, especially in the urban areas or where there's towns or cities, if the spill happens there or along major highways, there's these things called storm sewers. They're great for moving stormwater out of an area to prevent flooding, but they're really hard to work on when you got a spill because you need to know where is that spill going. So you can be out there and just pop manhole covers and start seeing where something goes, but it's much more efficient to have a map. So you can set up a response at, say, a lake where the stormwater might discharge. So you can set up containment around there. So it's really important to know. And then sometimes the locals also know how the storm sewer system was actually built. You'll have what was called as designed. So you'll have, this is the plan of how it was designed. But sometimes when they're building these, they have to do something different. So the maps and the actual piping sometimes are different. So the locals definitely know all of that. And when we're working on spills and storm sewers, as well as municipal, the sanitary sewers, but mostly storm sewers for this topic, is the spills will go where the water in the storm sewer is going. They'll flow if you're dealing with like a liquid spill. But what gets interesting is when you're dealing with, like, let's say it was a gasoline spill, that's going to be giving off a lot of vapor or fumes. And the fumes are not necessarily going to go where the liquid's going. That stuff can be influenced by barometric atmospheric pressures, wind. So it can actually blow the fumes in the opposite direction where the liquid spill might going. And that could be problematic because in a storm sewer, it's confined space. So if the vapor levels get high enough, you could have the risk of an explosion or an actual explosion, but it can also push fumes up into buildings, whether it's schools, gas stations, homes. whatever. So that adds another complicating factor. And it's really important to be careful how you open up a manhole. You know, if you want to see the spills in there, are you going to cause a spark moving metal on metal? So, you know, it gets a little tricky. I'm not going to lie. Sometimes we've puckered dealing with some of these and wondering how bad something's going to get, but that's another story for another day. When there are spills in sewers, it's standard practice that everybody uses vapor monitoring to determine the concentration of vapors in the sewer system. And the primary thing that we're worried about in the emergency response community is LEL, which stands for lower explosive limit, which is the concentration basically at which the vapor can get rich enough to basically explode or ignite. That's a bad thing, but it's something that we monitor and work with the fire departments on and the cleanup contractors. It influences the personal protective equipment people are wearing. It influences how much of an area or community might be evacuated by public safety officials. And these are all conversations we're having on the spill, and we're making really quick judgments. One of the things about in the emergency response community for the PCA is, you know, traditionally we'll have our office work where we can think about stuff, research stuff, mull it over with other people, and take a couple hours, couple days, couple weeks to think about something. But when some of these things are happening, we'll spend like a minute or two, maybe 5 minutes talking about it, and then we make decisions based on that. We don't have a lot of time to research and mull it over, or maybe the experts that we might want to talk to aren't available because it's in the middle of the night. So we will make decisions, right or wrong, because the incident requires that decisions get made. So, and sometimes we don't even have complete information about what's going on because something just happened. So we're working in this world of ambiguity sometimes, but trying to get all the information we can and finding that balance to make the best and safe decisions for people, protecting property and the environment. When there is a spill, some of the stuff that we do, especially in water, is we might do aeration. So some of the spills, let's say milk or gasoline or some other stuff, if we aerate it, that can actually help, one, disperse or remove the spill from the water to some degree, but it can also help add back oxygen into the water to mitigate fish kills or, you know, other aquatic organisms being killed. So that's something that can be done. One of the things that happens with aeration, if you're dealing with like a milk spill, for example, which when it decays, the bacteria, you know, it'll suck all the oxygen out and the fish die. So we want to add oxygen in. That will help break the material down and help the wildlife keep alive. But if you're dealing with aerating on a petroleum spill, which does happen, then that volatilizes a lot of the other compounds into the air, like, you know, benzene, you know, some of these other compounds. And it can also increase the vapor concentration in the air and increase the lower explosive limit. So that also has risks to the community from air exposure to stuff. It may risk fire explosion, hazards, or trigger the amount of PPE, personal protective equipment you need to wear, respirators. So every decision has implications that just need to be considered, and no one method is always right for every incident. It's kind of very unique and specific to the situation. We do use a lot of vacuum trucks, which you can see here. Basically, they're big vacuums powered by hydraulics, and they'll suck up whatever and put it into a truck. These trucks can suck up like things like bowling balls, but usually they're used to suck liquids out of storm sewers, out of creeks. They can suck up contaminated dirt. And different vacuum trucks are best suited for different types of materials. Some can handle acids, some can't. Some can handle petroleum contaminated things, some can't. Down in the bottom are these red tanks. They're called frac tanks. So on an emergency, a vacuum truck can only hold, 500 gallons to a couple thousand gallons, depending upon the size of the tank. You don't want those vacuum trucks driving for a couple hours to a waste disposal site. But that takes time away from the cleanup. So we'll bring in these frac tanks where the vacuum trucks can dump their waste into, and it gets stored on site so the vacuum trucks can keep working, for example. On the right is a picture of a creek that flows into a wetland, into a lake, but actually there's no water in this at the point. This is all diesel fuel. There's thousands of gallons of diesel fuel here from a spill. And in the bottom left corner, you'll see this half circle thing. That's a skimmer. So basically what that does is it's connected up to a vacuum truck hose, and it sucks the top 1/4 inch or 1/2 inch of product off and puts it in the vacuum truck. So those are great when there's petroleum floating on water, because we don't want to suck up water. That's just extra expense. We want to get the fuel off the water. So those are great for just recovering free product fuel. And they look in different types. There's different types of skimmers, but they all do the same thing. We work in the winter. So here's a large gasoline spill, but you don't know where it's going. So you got to bust open ice to see if it's made it there or if you can recover it. And in the winter, things freeze, the pipes freeze, the vacuum trucks freeze, the fittings freeze, the people freeze. It just makes everything worse to deal with. The air monitoring equipment is not designed to work in low temperatures. You're not getting good air monitoring readings. It's slips, trips, and falls really increase the risk. Falling through ice increases. The methods we would use to contain and recover a spill are different in ice than in free-flowing water. Sometimes it's just different. Now we'll talk about a few actual real-life spills that I thought might be of interest to this group. This is Minnehaha Creek a number of years ago that I responded to. And I got some containment boom set up, which is that yellow stuff. It doesn't absorb anything. It will just build up petroleum on the front end of it. And then that white boom that's out is called petroleum sorbent. It will suck up petroleum, but not water. So that's one way initially you can start recovering fuel out instead of using a vacuum truck. When I first arrived on scene to this diesel fuel spill and getting things set up, there were a number of young ladies who approached me who were tubing down the creek on a nice day. They were covered in diesel fuel. So their moms came up afterwards and they were all scared for their kids, justifiably so. So I told them how to get cleaned up and not to worry. And then people started reporting oil ducts. So a lot of spills are interacting with the public in different ways. Some of them are curious about what's going on. Sometimes we can talk to them. Sometimes we have to keep them away for safety. We'll talk about the environmental risk to people who are impacted, and deal with people who are scared. That's a natural human emotion. When something first happens, you don't know what's going on. Am I okay? Am I going to get sick? So we talk to people a lot about decontamination and actual risk on that. This one is does used petroleum get reused was a question. Yes, some used petroleum that is free product that can be recovered and brought to a facility that will reprocess it and reuse it into product. They'll put it back into the stream. Stuff that gets recovered on sorbents, that's not really recoverable. It'll get burned for energy recovery, or it will get landfilled. So this one is a tornado I responded to. And this slide's not so much about the tornado in and of itself. Up on top of the hill by that tan Conex box, there was a nice brand new 2-story home that this nice younger couple with a brand new baby lived in. And you can see there's no house up there anymore. The house is gone. And so, we're working on debris management and seeing what's what. but a really big part of our job is communicating with people. And a lot of people are traumatized. So in this particular case, there were a bunch of news helicopters floating overhead. They were just really annoying the couple. They were being invaded. What ended up happening was this young couple went into the basement of this new house. A mile-wide tornado went over the house and destroyed it. They were holding each other down in the basement, and they were looking up the center of the tornado. And so they started, as the tornado was moving, they started spinning. The mom was holding the baby. The dad was by himself. And the tornado sucked the baby out of the mom's arms. The whole family's in the air, spinning in the basement against the walls. The dad was able to grab the baby, and they're all spinning around the walls in the air. And the tornado passes, and they all fall down. Now they were really pissed off because the news media was there doing their job, which I get, but they felt like they were being re-victimized and being made, like the center of a circus, to paraphrase. So we had to talk with them, let them decompress, show our compassion, and figure out how to manage some of these incidents and the cleanups that were going on. So talking with people is a big part of our job, and understanding psychology and people's needs is very important. This is a large mercury spill that I'm showing you in somebody's house. Again, we can get contractors in there to clean up mercury spills. Mercury spills, the impacts are long-term usually, the risk. It's not, you have a spill today, you're in serious trouble today, but it's a cumulative effect. Younger people and women of childbearing age are most at risk due to neurological development issues. But in this particular case, one of the guys living in the house said he wanted to kill himself. So I was out there with the cleanup contractors. I took myself off of that project and sat down and talked with the person who was expressing, suicidal thoughts. Sometimes these things happen. You're there and different things happen, and you can't ignore people, and you don't want to ignore people. You want everybody to be okay. So it's hard work sometimes beyond the spill. Sometimes the spill is the easiest thing we do. It's working with the people or the hazards that are sometimes more difficult. Here's another one down near, I think it was Winona. So this was a new tugboat, I guess. And upstream, it lost power, and the dam was down. And so this vessel hit it, tipped over, went under the dam, and it's sitting on a concrete apron. And there were people inside, and there's a bunch of fuel in the water. The people in the boat they swam out. They were all covered in diesel fuel. And I got a call from the U.S. Coast Guard on this one, and we were coordinating that, and they were making sure I was running out there. And they said they were going to be coming out there, but we can get out there quicker than the Coast Guard. And then this facility is a U.S. Army Corps facility, and then the tugboat company. So we're coordinating with lots of people and cleanup contractors on that. So that was, interesting as well. And there was a lot of lice, ducks and bald eagles out here to protect, as well as, moving water. And Wisconsin's on the other side. So we were talking with Wisconsin and communicating with them, the county. So there's a lot of people that we're on the phone with, talking with, coordinating, making sure we understand their needs, expectations. People know what's going on, the media. So there's a lot more going on beyond just the spill cleanup on these things. This is a 1 million gallon manure spill somewhere down in southern Minnesota that I worked on. A pump failed, and it ended up pumping out 1 million gallons manure. This is the facility, the farm, but a whole lot of it flowed over land and went into a creek. So we were working on getting that creek sample, trying to get it recovered, get it aerated, working with our feedlot program, working with the feedlot owner, soil and water conservation districts, We had conversations with the natural resource damage assessment programs. We try to get all these things lined up on the front end. The DNR, of course. So there's a lot of stuff that goes on, and sampling of the soil and the groundwater afterward to look for impacts. But we're also not wanting to walk through this stuff because, you know, it's manure. There could be bacteria and diseases in there. And then we go on to an agricultural facility. They have their own biohazard plans you want to comply with, because as a responder coming in from the outside, you want to bring diseases into the farm to impact their animals and their economic well-being. So, again, a lot of factors to take into account beyond just dealing with the spill. Milk. These ones are tough to deal with because a lot of the people who have these spills, let's say a trucking company, a lot of people will argue, well, it's natural. What do we got to clean it up for? Well, crude oil is natural. Gasoline is natural. So we have to have a lot of conversations and educate folks after certain accidents or releases on why they need to clean things up. And milk is something we drink every day. Some of us do anyway. I drink maybe more than I should myself. But when the milk gets into surface waters, like we talked about a little bit earlier, the milk sitting there by itself is maybe not necessarily a problem. But when the bacteria start eating it to degrade it, that leads to a reduction in oxygen available in the water. And then anything that relies on that water to live has a good chance of dying if it's not cleaned up, aerated, cleaned up. And we'll work on water quality sampling to look at biological, chemical, oxygen demand, you know, and wildlife habitat, endangered species, wherever there's spills on water and stuff like that. But some of the organic food spills are hard to work on because not everybody understands the impact that these have on the environment. We deal a lot with grain spills, corn. People think that's what's the big deal. So we're also educating people on the environmental damage that things people deal with or are really used to can have on the environment. Not everybody always understands the long-term, short-term on that. But after we talk to them, they get educated. Most people are pretty good and want to do the right thing. Residential fuel oil spills. We do a lot of these. Honestly, these are a pain in the butt. Sometimes it's easier to work on a big train derailment than it is one small residential fuel oil spill. So the fuel oil can spill. Most of the fuel oil tanks are near somebody's home, and it'll run off into the soil. But also what happens is it'll soak into the ground, and a lot of times it'll enter the basement from the outside, go through old stone foundations. Sometimes people have these tanks inside their homes. So when they leak, they get fuel inside their home pooled up, soaking into the drywall, soaking into the floor. That fuel smell is getting into their furniture. A lot of people who have fuel also have drinking water wells outside. So now we got to worry about, are the wells contaminated? And then when they're outside, we go in and we basically dig up their yard to try to remove all the contaminated dirt, restore it. If it's inside, a lot of people have boxes of goods sitting in their basement, old clothes, toys, whatever. A lot of those become garbage. They're unusable at that point, so they get thrown out. Sometimes we have to clean up the basement walls with pressure washing or simple green. Sometimes that's not even enough, so we got to recoat the walls with like epoxy to prevent vapor migration. And if the fuel oil goes underneath the basement slab, you know, the floor, we're not going to be tearing up people's homes to clean up some of these fuel oil spills. So then we're worried about stuff called vapor mitigation, where the petroleum fumes are underneath the basement slab, but then that can get into the living space. So then we will install basically radon systems in their home to take the vapors from underneath the slab, the petroleum vapors, and exhaust those vapors outside, usually above the roof line, so that the vapors never have a chance to get into the space where people are living, thus reducing the exposure to the resident. These are complicated and hard, and they're very spendy as well, usually. Train derailments, we deal a lot with train derailments, but for this thing, I wanted to talk about a little bit of physics on a train derailment. Obviously, the spills and stuff get cleaned up. Some are easier than others, but a lot of our responses, in this case, a train derailment, but other ones, they're just dangerous just being there. And so people want to come up and walk around, look around at things. But when I look at this, the hazards that I see a lot of ways to end up getting really hurt or killed. So what I see as a responder is I see all these train cars kind of leaning and bent. So that means they're unstable. They could roll. So if you're over somewhere, they could roll and shift. You can get rolled and squished. But another thing a lot of people don't think about is if you see the steel rail that the train would roll on, it's really bent. And there's a really good chance that that bent rail is being held down by some of these rail cars through the force of the derailment. And should one of these train cars shift, or should a cleanup contractor come and lift up a rail car, there's a really reasonable chance that this bent rail will actually be freed up and turn into a whip, and it could cut you in half. So a lot of people don't think about that. You see the bent rail, but it's like under so much pressure, it'll act like a fluid or like a piece of fabric. It can just snap right back. So there's a lot of hazards on some of these emergency response sites that a lot of people don't get exposed to. So you got to be really thoughtful and really careful and plan things out so that nobody gets hurt and everybody goes home at the end of the day. So this is one of those radon systems that we talked about earlier. So it takes vapors from people's basements underneath their concrete floor, and it will exhaust the fumes outside. So it could be from like a fuel oil spill, but we put in a lot of these for old dry cleaner spills, like the perchlorate, perchloroethylene, or other ones where they're presenting fuel vapors in a home or other vapors that could put people at risk. So we're not going to tear people's homes down to clean up what might be underneath there, especially if it's mobile, contaminated groundwater that's moving around. It's just easier and cheaper and more friendly to put in a vapor system to get the vapor out of there, and then find other places that are more conducive to try to recover the spill through, boreholes, bioremediation, other treatment methods for the longer term. This is another one that I worked on. This was basically a chemical fire. And what makes this one interesting is they didn't really handle anything toxic or hazardous, just some epoxies and plastics and stuff like that. And this fire started in the back from a little spark on a mixer. And as soon as the people in the plant saw this, they started running to get out of the plant. And as they were running, this fire spread so quickly into these massive fireballs, people in the facility were being picked up and thrown 30, 40 feet through the plant, being thrown down stairways from the concussion of these explosions. So I met a lot of those folks out there on the response. But environmentally, this smoke cloud, particles like, the size of a cell phone roughly, were falling out of the sky like foam 45 miles away. So it went really high. It crossed different boundaries, and schools were being locked down. Businesses were being locked down. There's food production facilities behind here that had to be cleared with FDA to get back to making food. A lot of stuff going on, and health risks, trying to sample that air, which, it's bad. Look at it. You don't want to breathe it. But environmentally, in terms of the water, The fire department was putting down about 2.5 million gallons of water on this fire. But what was happening in the fire was it was creating new chemicals with the product that was in there. They didn't really have anything hazardous in there. But with the heat and the fire and the chemistry that was happening in the fire, bright green and bright purple stuff was leaking out of this building and going down in the storm sewer and into the Mississippi River that had a pH of like 0.5. So 2.5 million gallons probably of acid went down into the river. We worked with the county sheriff, the United States Coast Guard. We closed river traffic. We talked to the barge companies, told them to stay away. We worked with Met Council. We worked with so many people on this. And we worked with the company and we're advising them to get structural engineers in there because it blew the walls apart. And then dealing with the cleanup of whatever was left inside the building to sample it and see what needed to be done to get that cleaned up. So this went on this fire burned pretty good for a couple of days. The response went for a couple of weeks. We did a lot of work with our water folks on getting the river sampled, our cleanup contractors. But sometimes there's just nothing you can do about it, to be honest with you. Sometimes the stuff's going to get into the river. There's not a darn thing you can do about it. You can sample it. You can advise people to stay away. You can try your best. But sometimes the environment is going to get polluted, and that's just the way it is, sadly. We strive to get 100% recovery and to stop anything, but the real world comes into play. And often, even in a best case scenario, let's say like a petroleum spill, for example, that's not super complicated. If we can get 50 to 75% of the spill actually recovered, that's actually pretty good in the real world. Our goal is 100%, but for various reasons like underground utilities, undermining building foundations, all kinds of other structural stuff that sometimes has to come into play, or fractured karst geology. Sometimes the real world comes in and says, I know you got a goal to clean it up 100%, but that's not happening today. So we just deal with that. So that was all that I had for my presentation. Does anybody have any questions to ask or thoughts you might want to share?
How, how interesting. We do have one question that was posed a little earlier, Jason, from Sandy. She had a question about the incident command system. She said, is the incident command system that you were talking about connected? Is it the same thing as the notifications on our computers? Can you address that?
Notification on the computers. I don't know what.
That's like when we get the water in the third floor is shut down, stuff like that.
Oh, no. So there's a couple of different ways I suppose I could address this. So the incident command system is what we use and all emergency responders use. Oops, that's the duty officer calling me on a spill. But incident command is a system. It's a method of operating. So everybody knows where to fit in. It's not really a computer thing. It's just a way of operating and reorganizing. So like, during the day, we at the agency, we have the commissioner, we have division directors, we have supervisors and managers. In the emergency incident command system, those titles don't mean anything. It's what's your role, what's your expertise, and what do you do on an incident. Now, if the agency has a big emergency, let's say the building collapses, the agency would implement its own incident command system to organize and respond to that event. But a lot of that is all done in person. Some events you can do that virtually, but generally it's all an in-person response and way to organize and work together, if I'm answering that satisfactorily.
Paul asked, how often do you work with other agencies on simulated incidents?
We work with other agencies on simulated incidents frequently, as well as with the larger companies and smaller companies. So it's something we do on a regular basis. And a lot of times, for example, a pipeline company might organize a simulated incident, and they will invite a bunch of us, different state agencies, to come and work together. We also have a state responders group where all the different responders from the agencies get together, and we try to coordinate, talk about spills, do after actions, stuff like that. So we do that fairly frequently as well.
And Kristen asked something I was going to ask you actually. Is there any work done with post-flooding cleanup? I was kind of wondering about your role in that too. And wastewater treatment, untreated releases, flooding untreated releases, do these get cleaned up or recovered at all? I was kind of wondering the same thing.
Yeah. So on floods, a couple of different things happen. Most of the agency's work happens after the floodwaters go down, because that's where the waste and debris is. But we will respond if there's fuel oil spills or big chemical spills that need to be addressed right away, floating petroleum tanks, whatever. We'll deal with that right away. But when the waters go down, you're left with a lot of mud or sediment. And that has all the materials that was released in it. It has all the fecal bacteria, it has all the agricultural chemicals, it has all the fuel and oils and everything else. So that stuff gets tested, and then that determines how that material gets disposed of. We would still keep the emergency incident command system open. If fuel tanks get water in them from gas stations or other industries, we'll work with them on getting that cleaned up. A lot of grocery stores have food. We'll work with them on how the food gets taken care of. And then after all that happens, if there were bigger spills or higher contamination areas, we will sample the soil, the groundwater, well water, working with other agencies, as well, to see what's what, and then see what needs to happen for cleanup. So depending upon the flood and where it is, there's extensive work that happens after the floodwaters go down with debris and contamination.
Anyone else has any other questions? Now is the time. Either throw them in the chat, or you can unmute and ask Jason yourself. Kristen asked another question. How many lakes and streams were tested this year as a result of the flooding? And where can that information can be found? I received weekly phone calls from lake residents about the safety of their lakes.
I do not directly have that answer specifically, but if there's no indicate from the emergency response phase of things, if there's no known or suspected contamination, we won't sample those in the emergency response. Now, we have the ambient water program, lakes and streams, soil and water conservation districts that are out sampling all the time. So they may follow up on that stuff if there's not a known large spill or hazard. And if there is, we do it, or have our contractors do it, or work with our water programs to do it under the emergency phase. But yeah, for recent flooding, I don't have any of that data or results, off the top of my head. But we do make sure everything is safe. If something's not safe, we will work with the locals and put out press information releases, stakeout advisories on the water bodies and stuff like that. So we wouldn't keep it secret from anybody.
Kim says, I am so grateful for the work you do. Thank you for this information session. That kind of precedes what I was going to say too, Jason. I am really glad that we have people like you working on this stuff, because, oh my God, I cannot imagine having to respond to some of that stuff. It must be pretty daunting at times. Thanks for the work that you guys do.
Well, we couldn't do it without all the other agencies and partners and programs at the agency. We might be the face of it sometimes, but there's a whole lot more people and teamwork that goes behind it to actually make it work.
Well, sometimes when I wake up in the morning and I hear that there's been a spill at 3 a.m. someplace with a overturned rail car, I invariably think of you guys. So thanks for the work you do. We're just about out of time here. Unless somebody else has a burning question to ask, we can sign off, and we'll see you again in a couple of weeks. Thanks again, Jason.
Thanks, everyone. Have a good week.